I did storms and flooding, and the things we've seen were extended storms, which caused a lack of food access, medical care, and along with these storms, drought, because these storms come through and change things so the water isn't trickling in, it's coming in a big gulp and causing chaos. Creek diversions, passages, fish passages washed away, bomb cyclones, variable temps in one area, 80 degrees swing in temperatures in 24 hours, which seems crazy. Financial loss, no stormwater infrastructure was a huge problem. Erosion, seasonal changes, so a shorter spring or a shorter summer or shorter winter storms. Contaminants being washed down, PFAS and PFAS were discussed, damage to homes and campsites, and I don't mean like campground, I mean like a campsite where you fish camp or a deer camp. Drinking water contamination, septic tank issues floating away, leach lines going, increase in mosquitoes, decrease in moose, no flood insurance, and loss of treasures when storms come through and flood the homes, or you have a multi-generational home and you have to move, your treasures can be lost. What people have tried to do, are we on that, or do you want to stop at problems? Okay. Solutions. Some of the things, the cost of the mitigation is too high. For Saboba, they were going to do a stormwater infrastructure. The initial cost was too high, so they've done a phased approach to fix that. Awareness, education, EMS systems, so that people know when flooding is going to happen. Emergency preparation, stockpiling supplies, firewood for seniors, making sure that things are taken care of. If you have boats that need to be moved, move them. People that need to be moved, move them. Warming shelters, providing supplies for seniors and elders. There's a problem with the lack of funding for non-federally recognized tribes, and hazardous waste, stopping the mitigation efforts of tribes if you have hazardous waste sites on or near your lands. Other things that are working, restoration grants, use and reuse of water to recharge your aquifers, increasing the number of native with a lowercase n gardens, also with an uppercase n, I guess, depending on who makes them. Restoring springs, capturing stormwater, using riprap, and using the check dams and other native uses of water capture, and then using rebuilding using native designs for your homes. So in Alaska, they were talking about how the square Western style homes are really susceptible to storms. And so building the more softer shaped traditional style homes is going to make the housing more resilient. And if people had all the money in the world that I could give them today, they would make those reclaimed homes, increase mangroves, and increase green infrastructure, and remove new growth in some wash areas like salt cedar and replace them with plants that don't suck up the water like willow. Thanks.
Lori. Thank you, Lori. One of the best listeners in the business out there, working for Iwiha. All right, who wants to go next? Asamo, you look ready. Okay, why don't you introduce yourself again, just so people know what agency you're from?
Hello? Oh, there we go. Hey, everybody. I'm Osamu. I work for the California Department of Public Health, the state agency. And our group was temperature extremes, although I did keep saying extreme heat, so apologies to my co-facilitator, Lisa, who has disappeared. So we talked about the impact being, and many tribes many people seeing record-breaking heat waves in both kind of the max temperature and also the length of the heat waves. Lisa shared the over 30 days of over 115 degrees or something like that, which is just wild. And that has impacts on human health, but it also has impacts on the distribution of plants and the scarcity of, medicinally important plants as well as foods, and our broader ecosystems, including, the trees, which we also count on to cool us. We talked a little bit about how that can increase the likelihood of harmful algal blooms in lakes and the ocean, and also how those rising water temperatures in oceans have even impacted salmon spawning in Alaska, leading to one interesting program which someone shared about, which is like salmon sharing, where southern folks have sent salmon north. Is that correct? Right. But then that, by sharing the salmon, obviously that's a nice solidarity, but that can be lower quality salmon, that has to be shipped a long way, so it's not as good, and then you don't have the same pride in having fished for your own fish. In other adaptation strategy news, we heard a lot about cooling centers, which I think are really being pushed in California right now. But there's definitely some downsides to them, like some tribes reported not seeing people using them as much as maybe they would have liked, especially elders just kind of tend to stay in their homes. And so in response, some folks have gone to window AC programs where you basically give a free air conditioner. Those also have downsides, including the electricity costs for some of those fixed income folks. So we talked a bit about how you can have people's families volunteer to pay for those, help subsidize the cost of that electricity, or maybe your tribal government can come up with a fund, use their general fund to set aside some money to subsidize that, or maybe go get a grant to subsidize those costs for folks. We also talk more generally about how do you monitor your elders and make sure that they're okay during these kinds of events, using the contact lists that we have, many people have from COVID, to make sure that we're doing home visits and checking up on those medically vulnerable people, including other people who are on medical devices that, they can't just up and leave to go to a cooling center with no notice or assistance. Using more informal cooling centers, so Walmart or movie theaters, or even your casinos. For non-gaming tribes, this limits people's ability to respond because they might not have money set aside that they can use to subsidize utilities and other things like that. So there's more challenges there. We talked about tree giveaway programs, which, trees are heat sinks, especially when they get large and they have a significant amount of canopy. But there are challenges to using trees and kind of land management to keep things cool, especially if you don't own all the land around your tribe. You might have challenges working with national forest managers, U.S. Forest Service, to really do culturally appropriate forest management practices, and you might have to work with them to try to make that happen. We did hear, that is increasingly happening, that people are being offered a seat at the table, but that's not the same thing as actually being given power and a voice. Just because they invite you doesn't mean they're necessarily listening to you. But it is a first step. We talked a little bit about tracking tree canopy, and just some of the different challenges of these strategies being, you don't have as many members living on your reservation. It makes outreach a lot harder. If you are, you site your cooling center too far away from people, then even less people will use it. And then, like we said, medically dependent folks need some kind of transportation to get there. some tribes are working on getting solar and batteries for their cooling centers to make sure that they're kind of independent of the grid if there's power outages. And there's money for that kind of stuff. There are grants for those things, but that takes capacity to apply for. And then finally, we talked a little bit about monitoring topsoil moisture, which I hadn't heard about, although that equipment is also quite expensive. Anybody from my group want to share anything else? Lisa?
I'm sorry, I didn't even participate in this group, but I have a I have a comment on becoming the partner who gets to manage lands. There's a whole movement, and there's two aspects of it. There's co-management, which is happening where you work as an equal partner with the federal agency. But then there's a whole line of thought of folks who are saying, we don't have time for even co-management, that we need to take the reins on managing those lands now because we have the solutions as Indigenous people and we don't have time to mess around. Things are happening too freaking fast. So I guess part of what I'm trying to say is I want to say it, something that's not appropriate, but getting the cojones to just do it. You know what I mean? We have to be confident in supplying those solutions, I guess.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Extreme heat or extreme temperature, folks. So I wonder if we can go to Nikki next, melting ice and sea level rise, and tell us what you got.
Thank you. Well, we had some really good feedback on the sea level rise and melting ice. So one of the big items that came up was, I think maybe we mentioned this earlier, was the impacts on our burial sites. Our ancestral burial sites are being exposed or washed away. And so that is becoming a big issue of what to do about it, including writing documents like an assessment on it. So that's a big thing. Some of the other impacts are less access to subsistence foods. Relatives from Alaska mentioned walrus. Walrus don't have ice to float on, so they're moving further up north, which makes it harder for the hunters to travel because the reliance on gas-powered vehicles. When gas is over $7 a gallon, and you live in an extremely rural area, that makes it harder. But also the less access to subsistence foods means probably more reliance on processed foods, which leads to health impacts like diabetes and obesity and all that stuff. So that's a big deal for our relatives who live in really rural areas. And whether you're in the desert or you're in the Arctic, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to face that. Increased flooding from hurricanes and typhoons that have and will wash away important structures like water storage and sewage and etc. Melting permafrost in Alaska is a big deal because that also means the reliance on propane gas electric fridges, to store. I think Randy was saying, whales bigger than this room. How are you going to store all that when your natural refrigeration is being impacted? So, and then again, the reliance on fossil fuel energy increases. Also, animal migrations are disrupted. Again, moose, elk, walrus moving elsewhere. And also the land is just changing. So that creates a domino effect adds to the displacement of people and property. We had some really amazing strategies. One of them is easy to say, but harder to do is moving to higher ground. Relocation is something that is extremely hard and costly. Also, Lillian mentions one of the solutions where they built a natural bridge. and that where the community could access berries across, is it a river or water? A creek. And it was sun-baked. No, it wasn't sunbaked. I think I misheard that. Anyways, they used like planks and they used just whatever they had around there to build that bridge, but I think it was washed away again, was it? So something the community is coming up with solutions, like what you have there. Also, community of care. I really liked what Laverne was saying about creating a community of care where we're allowed to speak, we're allowed to share, and we're allowing the space to heal. And which is why we're also here in the room, right? The summit is an amazing place to not only learn, but also educate others. And so again, and we're healing while we're also saying it, because we're saying it out loud, but we're also hearing that we're not alone. So that is a big thing. We're talking a lot about grief and depression. And I know you all have really inspired me. Now my weather has changed, Shasta. I am sunny now, super sunny. Despite all the stuff that we've heard, I do feel a lot of hope. So that's really important. And last but not least is people have mentioned infrastructure resilience, trying to change the code, trying to change how existing or new buildings are being built. And there's something called the LEO network. If you're not familiar with it, I suggest you all look it up. It is, I think it's convened by the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. It's called the Local Environmental Observation Network. And Randy, I think you brought this up, right? And it's citizen science where anyone in this room could sign up for it, create a profile, and then if you see like the cliff falling down, you can take a picture of it and submit that. And so other people can see what's going on in terms of like, sea level rise and the impacts of that too. So, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who contributed. That was awesome. So I appreciate it. Bia.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. That was great. Okay, let's go to Patricia and Wildfire.
Okay, great. We had Wildfire. A lot of our discussions on exposure, we talked a lot. I did this in groups, so I'm going to be flipping a lot. A lot of quick, fast wildfire comes on quick, dry, heavy winds, so not a lot of time to respond. A lot of discussion around impacts to access. One road in, one road out. What does that mean? Not just for evacuation, but access to resources after, right? And then that also wildfires lead to erosion and things like that, and kind of what are those impacts too when you just have one road in or one or two or three. I mean, even that, right, is impactful. A lot about air quality as far as impacts go, and I think we had actually one person say that they themselves aren't experiencing wildfire, but they're greatly impacted by smoke, by air quality. Access and support. Post-fire impacts, so hydrophobic soils. Another impact in how they're experiencing wildfire goes to the insurance discussion that we were already talking about. Homes unable to get insurance too expensive, homeowners unable to sell their homes. So that really has that socioeconomic impact there. Adaptation strategies, a lot of fuel reduction, and depending on where communities were coming from, that changed a lot. But I felt like the fuel reduction and kind of the whole strategies was really around training that community, training their tribal communities to do that fuel reduction, to get back on the land and to not rely on state and federal entities, right? So that was a really big one. Training, a lot of assessments, identifying areas of high congregation or high priority areas. So some of the high priority areas were high congregation areas because of trying to protect it, but then also those are the areas more susceptible to wildfire, right? Because a lot of human impacts are there. air quality programs, establishing air quality programs. Here I go flipping, I'm sorry. I didn't think this through. Contingency plans we talked about. LiDAR, the use of LiDAR. Who was that was talking about LiDAR in our group? Yes, yeah, Ryan. It sounds like a really awesome tool to be able to use to map out and try to anticipate where fires are going to be. We did talk a little bit about general mapping and then also establishing protocols within your tribal communities on who has access to data, what that data sovereignty looks like, how we're sharing it in times of emergency, who has access to that, who's getting out in the land and making sure that certain resources are protected, and the knowledge of where those resources are protected. Yeah, training. There's a few that I think on the there's a few that cultivating forest gardens. Who was the one that was talking? Who talked about that? I was really excited about that. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about how that's like not innovative, right? But colonizers, when we came and saw it, we saw wildlands, right? We saw things that weren't being managed, and really the whole time they were being managed, right? So kind of going back to how do we manage this land in a good way? I kind of want to, there's a lot of assessments. What role is the state playing? How are we doing burn plans? How are we making sure that tribes are leading those burn plans? We talked a lot about power control, so kind of like not just having a seat at the table, but who's controlling these decisions, right? And then I really want to end on the rights of nature, and I think the closest thing I can think of from a state's perspective is what's the tribal beneficial uses? Sorry, my acronym is but a lot of tribes are leading the way, and I think Yurok is one of them, was an example that we talked about how do we give rights, human rights, being rights back to nature so we can protect them the same way. So that's something that I thought was really cool that we talked about. Yeah.
Okay, so the last one was Drought, and that was Chris's breakout that I sort of took over. So do you want to do this, or should I?
And let you fill the gaps. Sure. So I think I would need to. I think a couple of things that were highlighted in terms of experiencing. One was wildlife migration. And so when there isn't water in the kind of normal native areas, then wildlife migrates in a different way. So then there's issues with gaming. There were issues of looking at even the Pacific Northwest, where there are issues of drought and water access during droughts. So yeah, for hunting and gaming, yeah. And then in issues even in areas that you think are lush and green and wet, having issues of access to water, either through groundwater or because of infrastructure issues. And there were also issues of water rights, which is a whole other political issue in itself. So then there are areas that need to drill more wells. There's also issues of people moving into areas, maybe people coming into the reservation and needing access to water as well. There are also challenges of where areas where there are droughts declared, then there were water restrictions placed on folks to shorten their showers or to not use them on lawns. There are mental health issues of causing anxiety, concerns about, well, we only have one spring in our community. How can we keep that spring or restore springs and rivers? We talked about changes in vegetation, so in the seasons or in the zones where vegetation grow. And then there were some ways of adaptation strategies that people talked about, which are somewhere similar to those in the storms and the floods. So there were check dams, possibly uses of the riprap to hold water as retention ponds. There are also outreach opportunities to only plant native plants or to take out lawns and turf and grass and to look into more drought tolerant or plants to put in. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that was great. I can't help myself from taking over. But we did. What I'm finding listening to all this is that there was a lot of crossover. Some of these strategies for drought are some of the same strategies for wildfire and storms and flooding, and even the melting ice and sea level rise. So I think that that's really shows us something, that there's so much crossover in this stuff. And the other thing I want to say is just that these conversations have been fantastic. You know, in our best laid plans, right, we've got this agenda where we're like, all right, at 2:45 we're going to do this, you know, and at 3:15 we're going to do that. And instead we're having conversations and we're not going to worry about what the clock says, except for the fact that we won't keep you here longer than we said we would, because nobody wants to do that. But that being said, we were going to do breakout number 2. We're still doing it, but we're not breaking out, because I think we're going to still see a lot of overlap with everything that we just talked about. But rather than talk about the exposures, we want to talk about the impacts and how those impacts are related to these different types of areas that we need to be concerned about. So we have our natural and managed lands. What are our adaptation strategies for those? How are we going to protect our natural lands against these threats? Same thing with our built environment, our physical and mental health, cultural and spiritual health, and then our socioeconomic health. So we've got these listed as breakouts, but we're like 45 minutes behind. So, and we do want to get out and get our walk and talk before the sun goes down, darn time change. And so let's just talk about these things, because I don't think that we always really think about these in terms of being broken into different categories. What are our concerns about our built environment? What are our concerns about our mental health? Could you put that slide back? Because now I don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, there they are. Natural environment, built environment, health and social environment. So I actually want to start with the hardest one, which is the mental health, the cultural and spiritual health impacts. What are some adaptation strategies for helping manage those impacts? And in Paula, we developed basically a mental health strategy where we came up with ideas for how to help the community build its resilience against some of the anxieties and some of the stresses. And one thing we found was that the work we had done to do that applied really well to what happened during the pandemic, because we had some of the same issues with people being afraid. And I want to hear some of these things from you all, what may have happened in your communities during COVID that you could potentially also use to help people with some of their climate anxiety. So we had one community, not event, but initiative, I guess you could say, where some of our singers got into the back of pickup trucks and with their masks on, but they had their rattles and they had little like portable speakers, and they drove to people's houses and they would sing outside the houses, 2 or 3 or 4 songs, so people could come outside and they could hear the songs, and they could dance, because you couldn't get together. And it made people feel like they were coming together in a way, if spiritually and culturally, that they couldn't do physically, because we couldn't hug people that were outside of our households, things like that. We can do those things for the social and emotional and spiritual and cultural health of people as the impacts of climate change. So I know it's deep and it's sensitive stuff, but does anybody have any examples of things like that they think could help their communities keep their hope? Celso.
So like I said earlier, that we picked saguaro fruit and we make a they drink, and then we celebrate the 4 days to bring the water to the land. And so I do know that it's a 4-day ceremony, but I do know that we're modifying our ceremony a little bit. And the discussion was in the council, we're changing the format of the ceremony. And what people were saying is that, the blessing is still the same. We just have to adapt to what's happening around us. And some of the argument from the older people, well, we're going to change the way we look at stuff. And then the younger people are saying, well, we changed anyway. We're evolving. We're adapting. So things that were done 500 years ago, we don't know how they did it, but we learned what they said they did. And so if we change and this is us now in this time and space, and this is how we celebrate what's going on now, because we weren't there then and we're not going to be there in the future. So we need to adapt our ceremonies to what we see now and bless ourselves the same blessing that we did before. And that's hard because you're changing tradition. But a lot of people are starting to say, well, we wear pants now. We eat pizza. So why are we making a big deal of the heart and the head feels about something we care about?
Thank you for the reminder that we didn't used to wear pants. I'm not wearing pants. I'm wearing a dress. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Where'd you go, Laverne?
Yeah, Laverne and I and some of the folks at lunch were having a really good conversation about this, the mental health, spiritual health, psychosocial resilience. How do you do it? How do you make it happen?